Welcome, and thank you for joining me. Today, we're going to talk about the VBRE Playbook section on childcare-friendly regulations, which is part of our resources around building a policy foundation. So today, the goal is that you'll become familiar with the content and the tools in the Playbook brief section called Childcare Friendly Regulations. And I'll invite you to consider some ways that you might use the playbook brief in your region and think about some questions related to that. So this brief is all about streamlining the approval process and reducing costs for childcare providers by eliminating unnecessary barriers. The strategy is important because it means that providers can more easily open at a lower cost, and that expands access for families. So a few examples of what it might look like, just to give you an idea of what we're talking about. So this might include local governments allowing childcare as a by right land use and getting rid of lengthy public permitting processes. Or it might look like waiving application fees or creating expedited timelines. Some jurisdictions adopt policies stating that they will not have any local requirements greater than those required by state licensing. Richmond is one place that has worked on that. I also want to note that throughout this brief, what you'll find are some items that will make sense to implement at a local level and some where the state has preemptive authority. That means that they make the rules. There also are some strategies where coordinated multi-region or statewide efforts might make the most sense. So we'd love for you to think about all of these opportunities, whether you're going to go out and work on local action or work in partnership with other regions on advocacy. So here's a bit more detail about why we might want to pursue this strategy. The childcare business model is highly constrained. Providers operate on thin margins, they have high startup costs, and they have limited access to capital to cover both startup and operating costs. So this leaves them with a real challenge when they have to incur costs prior to opening their doors. I know that there are providers out there who borrow against their personal home at a high interest rate, for example, because they can't access business loans. And then you combine this with the complexity of the regulatory environment. Providers have to navigate multiple agencies. They wait a long time for approvals, and sometimes they encounter conflicting or confusing information depending on who they talk to. So if we can reduce the regulatory complexity and the associated costs, then we can help providers shift their focus and their revenue to other places, such as increasing teacher pay or lowering tuition. So we've articulated a few actions in the brief that can get you started. So the first is really understanding the experience of childcare providers, knowing what processes they have to navigate, what costs them a lot of money, where do they get stuck. You can interview childcare providers to understand this information. And if you can find potential providers who started the process and gave up, that can also be a really rich source of data for answering this question. Second, because childcare providers navigate so many different agencies, including childcare licensing, planning and zoning, building licensing, building inspection, fire, health, etc., it can be really valuable to get representatives from all of these organizations in the room together to map out the process. Often, these professionals who really know these processes well will be able to identify effective opportunities for streamlining if they're asked to make this a priority by leaders in their jurisdiction. Next, it can be really helpful to start by thinking about one quick win that you might pursue. So maybe there's a fee that can be waived. Maybe there's a review timeline that could be expedited, or a particular requirement that could be waived. This gives you something tangible to work on and really opens the opportunity to tell the story about how regulatory alignment can help expand childcare supply, and you can build from there. And finally, a guide for childcare providers can be a really great tangible action, laying out the process, including contact information, and helping providers find what they need. I know we've also talked about working together across some of the regions to do some coordinated activity in this area. So that's something you might consider as well. So, this brief really lays out the process for helping to align the regulatory environment. Our ultimate goal is to align and simplify the regulations. Excuse me. As we discussed, that means starting by understanding what a provider experiences and where the pain points are in the process. This is auditing their experience, right? And this is a really good opportunity to engage with economic development and business support organizations to help them to see childcare as a small business in their community and to think about how they can support these childcare businesses through the regulatory process. Then we can take a look at where additional flexibility and changes might work out, reviewing the code, thinking about how we can maintain safety but create some flexibility. And then finally, as I said earlier, really starting with some quick wins. These things can all take a long time and a lot of effort, and the quick wins really help get everyone in the right frame of mind for thinking about supporting childcare and getting the ball rolling. So in the brief on pages 16 and 17, there's a long list of some of the challenges and opportunities that we see in childcare regulation. On this slide, I've pulled a few examples. Again, the chart has both potential local actions and coordinated state level actions to consider. Think of this like a menu and determine what you want to pursue based on what you hear from providers in your community. So here's a few key examples. We know that the upfront costs for applications, permits, and consultants can be very high. So some things we might look at are waiving or reducing those application and permit fees for childcare, or providing technical assistance and navigation support to reduce the need to hire consultants. We know that zoning can require a lengthy and expensive process if a special or conditional use permit is required. So we can look at the opportunity to increase the types of zone districts that allow family childcare homes and childcare centers as a use by right. That means only an administrative review without those public hearings. We know that sometimes requirements across agencies can be duplicative or they can be conflicting. And so some things we might look at there are adopting a no requirement greater than licensing policy, identifying a single point of access or application for providers, combining paperwork requirements wherever we can, and reviewing existing requirements for conflicts. And finally, on this list, we know that many local officials are unfamiliar with the realities of childcare businesses. So we can think about finding opportunities to invite providers to present, maybe to planning commissions, to local elected officials, to other groups. And we can conduct provider experience audits with technical assistance to local governments as well. And as I said, I want you to take a look at pages 16 and 17 of the playbook to find a long list of additional examples. So also in the brief, we have some links to examples of where this has been done. And I'd like to share some with you and encourage you to pull on these examples as you engage within your region. So first, I already mentioned that the City of Richmond has pursued a no requirements greater than licensing initiative as part of their long-range planning efforts, which means taking a look at what requirements childcare has to meet locally and then aligning those to the licensing requirements to reduce duplication. In Seattle, Washington, the Childcare Near You initiative eliminated conditional use permits and now allows childcare in nearly all types of zone districts. In Austin, Texas, they created a new zoning designation that expanded permitted areas. They estimated that this led to a 250% increase in space that could be available for childcare. In San Mateo County, California, the Planning and Building Department created a streamlined permitting process for childcare, and they only require staff level approval without lengthy public hearings. In California, statewide legislation, the Keeping Kids Close to Home Act, created new tenants' rights protections for in home childcare providers and said that family childcare must be treated as a residential use without additional zoning, approval, or other permitting processes. And finally, in Bothell, Washington, they determined that childcare centers are no longer required to offer off street parking, and they can operate in any residential district. So, there are some additional examples in the brief, and I'd encourage you to draw on these to help paint a picture of what might be possible when you're thinking about advocating for this strategy within your region. So, finally, I want to reiterate the takeaway message here. Aligned regulations help childcare businesses grow, and removing barriers to entry helps providers operate sustainably, which increases access to childcare for families. So, as we finish up, I want to invite you to consider a few key things here. These are questions for you to reflect on following your review of the playbook and this presentation. What do you know about providers' experience navigating regulations in your region? What do you have questions about? How might you answer those questions? Have you already done any work in this area that might help other regions? Think about maybe sharing those in the community of practice or other interactions across the VB regions. Is there anything you might want to ask the broader group for help with? So, as you consider all of these things, I hope that this can help to inform the work within your region and to think about the idea of bringing childcare friendly regulations to your region. Thank you.